Major funding for this production is provided by American Bank of Lafayette, the financial choice of the 80s. Additional funding provided by the Friends of LPB and Union National Life Insurance, a Louisiana company serving Louisiana and the South since 1926.
One morning, not long after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, a young fellow named Bob Barrow sat at his home in St. Francisville reading the Morning Advocate newspaper. And Bob Barrow saw an ad, and he decided to go ahead and do what that ad said. Well, it was an ad to join the United States Marine Corps. And fellow Louisianians, I want to introduce to you not young Bob Barrow, but General Robert H. Barrow, the Commandant of the Marines. General Barrow, hello.
Pleasure to see you, sir.
Thank you for letting us into your gorgeous home here in Washington, the Commandant's home. And Ms. Barrow told us this is perhaps the oldest residence, official residence in Washington.
It is. It was the site for this house and the barracks, which is the oldest in the Marine Corps, was selected by then President Thomas Jefferson and the Commandant of the Marine Corps at that time. They rode horseback down and picked out this site in 1803. This house was completed in 1806. And every commandant has lived in it since then, and it's very charming and historic and great place to live.
So this is older than the White House, is it not?
Yes, it's the oldest public building in Washington, still being used for what it was originally intended to be used for.
General Barrow, what would be the chances of a young fella or a woman joining the Marines, coming up through the ranks, not an academy graduate, and finally becoming the head of the whole shooting match? It sounds like a miraculous story.
Well, there are a great many opportunities in the Marine Corps for young men who work at it, and I wouldn't choose to put any figure on the odds, but it can happen, as obviously it did.
Sir, there's been an interesting relationship between the Marine Corps and Louisiana. There have been some other Louisianians who've done real well with the Corps, have they not?
Well, I think perhaps our most distinguished commandant, if I may say so, was General Legends. John Lejeune, who was born and reared in Ponkapee Parish. He was a Naval Academy graduate after 2 years at LSU. And this was done about in 1888. He commanded the Marines in France in World War I, and indeed, when the Marine Brigade was integrated into the 2nd Army Division, he commanded the entire division. He was the commandant for 11 years, and father of the modern Marine Corps, as we like to say. And that, incidentally, is about 15 miles as the crow flies from where I was born and reared.
That's where he came from. So there may be something in the drinking water there.
Perhaps so.
Young fellows looking for a career maybe ought to think about you and him. General, as this program is being shown, you will have concluded some 41 years as a United States Marine. As you look back over that remarkable career, what were the events that were the most significant to you?
Well, one would have to obviously speak to the major events, and that would be the 3 wars that I happen to be a part of, World War II, Korea, and the Vietnam War. But as you look closer, one would have to say that the people in those events have the most lasting impression with me. For I believe that people tend to shape events, and certainly within events become the most distinctive part of it. Perhaps that's a good reason why I think the reading of biographies is a good way to read history, because people are so important in anything that's done.
Who was the most interesting person that you think that you served under?
Well, that would be very difficult to answer. There have been so many, some who were a legend even while they were alive. Chesty Puller was one example. He was a regimental commander of mine in Korea. But there have been many others. Again, the ones that I remember were not in their own right famous in terms of a national name, but some young Marine corporal of PFC who performed so valiantly, courageously in some particular event that I'm more likely to remember him than some of the others.
Sir, the Vietnamese War, that was a different war, was it not? Something happened. I'm not embarrassed that I can't articulate it because I think entire generations have not been able to articulate it. It was a war that I think we look back and whether or not we won or lost has not been determined. And could we have won or lost has not been determined. And I don't want to put you on any kind of spot, but can you give just some insight? What do you feel about it?
Well, I certainly don't mind talking about it, although I must say that your program does not provide enough time to cover it in the detail it deserves. That war had many faces to it, both as it was fought in Vietnam and as it was directed from Washington. And basically, fundamentally, discounting any proposition as to whether we should or should not have been there, once the commitment was made, we should have then followed through with the determination to win. And instead, we thought we could perhaps win with a partial effort, not a complete effort, continuing the economy under the same effort and having the so-called guns and butters both working at the same time. And with those kind of constraints imposed and the philosophy that somehow it could be a conflict in which we would enter it in a measured way, applying just enough to perhaps succeed over a given period of time, over a given set of circumstances, is not the way to fight a war. So it was, in my judgment, badly directed. But on the battlefield itself, the young Americans have been given grave disservice in the kind of comments and overall conclusions drawn from the war itself. You have to draw a distinction. The war was, you can debate whether we should have been there or not. You can debate as to how it was directed or not, and the faults, as I've indicated in my judgment, that existed. But there's no room for debate as far as the performance of the individual soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine who participated. They were as good as any war we've ever fought in, given the right leadership and considering the psychological disadvantages under which they had to fight, both locally and back home. They did a magnificent job.
Sir, you have fought in 3 wars. How prepared is the Marine Corps for the next one, and God forbid that it should ever come?
Well, I would repeat your last comment. God forbid that we do have another. But I do believe, in all candor, reflecting on your question very carefully, that the Marine Corps today is in the best shape it has ever been in peacetime. We are very healthy, and we are getting healthier. You measure that many ways. To begin with, there's a clear understanding among the decision makers, my civilian superiors here in Washington, both houses of Congress, as to the utility of the Marine Corps, our unique capability, a broad spectrum of things that we can do. And in association with the Navy, which is the way we choose to go to war, the capability we have to participate globally. And after all, we do have global responsibilities. We have treaty and agreements with some 40-odd nations that relate to defense. We have a need to gain access to resources and to marketplaces, and to also make sure the other fellow who would like to make mischief in some place that's friendly to us and needs our help, with whom we don't have an agreement, we might want to intervene. In any case, that's globally. And when you say global strategy, you must necessarily bring it down to being maritime strategy, using the oceans as highways to get to troubled spots. And when you say maritime strategy, the United States Marine Corps obviously comes into play. Now, having said that, if there's an understanding as to our utility, It follows that those who authorize the Marine Corps' equipment and weapons and end strength of people and appropriate the monies to support it, I'm speaking specifically of Congress, are supportive. And they have never been more supportive than they are presently. We enjoy a very fine relationship with all areas of government, but particularly the Congress in terms of the Marine Corps support. So we are bringing into the Marine Corps weapons, vehicles, aircraft, just about all of the things of war in an unprecedented manner. We are modernizing as we never have before in peacetime. And having said that, there's even a brighter picture that's associated with it, and that is the people part of the equation. The young men and women that we are enlisting today are probably the finest we've ever brought in the Marine Corps. So, in a sense, some of my people have coined the term, we are entering a kind of golden era. I suppose proof of that might be if you ask me if I could do it over again, when would I like to start? I would say right now.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
General, there's a tradition that's as old as the United States itself, this tradition of Southerners distinguishing themselves in the military. Did your upbringing in West Feliciana Parish, did this have any effect or contribute towards this?
Well, I think that going back 3 centuries, certainly before the war between the states, there was a kind of martial spirit among the youth in the South that in some respects was reinforced after that war, because about the only thing the Southerners had left was a strong example of valor. So undiminished valor was the heritage that came out of the war between the states, and therefore in subsequent conflicts they rushed to the colors to prove that they still possessed it, and I think they still are. There's every evidence that the Southerners are now enlisting at a higher rate than other parts of the country. As to West Feliciana itself, trying to narrow your question down a little bit, it's an interesting one, because many of the things that would prepare one for service in the Marine Corps or any other service are the same kinds of things that would prepare one for any endeavor if he's going to do it right. And it's really the basic values that one acquires in his youth, from the home that he's brought up in, his church, his school, his community. And I must say that I had, while there was a lot of adversity in terms of economics in those days, people didn't have much in way of material possessions and money, but there were a lot of things that are far more important than that, and it helped shape the character of those of us who were a part of it. So things like integrity and honesty and sense of duty and being sensitive to people and that sort of thing. So if I had preparation, that would be it. It was the community in which I grew up.
Was there a military tradition in the Barrow family?
Not really. I wouldn't characterize it as a tradition. My great-grandfather, as many of his generation did, he was able to, because he was financially well off, raised a company at the place that I'm fortunate enough to own, and it was called the Rosale Guards, R-O-S-A-L-E. Rosale was the name of the plantation. And he offered it to the state of Louisiana and became Company I, 11th Louisiana Infantry. And he was a man without any military background, which was true of many Southerners, but he proved himself in the Battle of Belmont and Pea Ridge, and by the time Shiloh came around, he was the regimental commander of the 11th Louisiana Infantry. Other than that, there's no long tradition of service.
How about your children? Any of them followed in the footsteps?
Well, their thoughts to the contrary as they were growing up notwithstanding, 3 of the 5 have an affiliation with the Marine Corps. I have twin daughters that are married to Marine officers, both fine officers, and then my youngest son, who graduated from Tulane 3 years ago, is a first lieutenant, having had 2 tours of duty in the Mediterranean, one of which was in Beirut. He's now serving in Paris Island. And they all make me very proud, and they all are doing well in the Marine Corps.
Is it tough on kids to be raised as military children? Of course, not everybody's father's the head of the Marine Corps, but let's just take the average child being raised as a kid of a
Plus and minuses. There's no question that there's a lot of uprooting, and you don't like to leave your friends that you've developed in one place. There's always the thought that there's no friend that you will ever have is like the one you're leaving. And yet they get over it in time, and there is the opportunity for a great deal of travel, seeing places and things that they would not otherwise perhaps have an opportunity to see. So I think there are more advantages. The advantages far outweigh the disadvantages.
General Barrow, when you joined the Marine Corps, took your oath of office, if an angel's voice had come to you and said, one day you'll be in charge of the whole shooting match, would you have thought they were crazy?
Well, if not crazy, I surely would not have believed it, that's for sure. I don't think anyone advice to the contrary, notwithstanding that we seem to receive every now and then, should seek to be at the top of anything. You do whatever it is you expected to do at whatever level you're doing it, and if you do it well enough and you get the proper recognition, your reward will in time come. I've been very fortunate in places that I've served, and particularly fortunate with respect to the people I've served with. I've had some outstanding subordinates who, from time to time, made me look better than I probably indeed really was under certain circumstances. So I've been shaped in my career by a lot of people who've inspired me and those who've worked for me, and I'm very fortunate to have ended up being commandant. I recognize that.
General Barrow, you've lived all over the world, and as a high-ranking officer, I suspect in some places you've lived real well. But now you've come on home, of all places, to St. Francisville, Louisiana. Why didn't you get a villa in Cannes or an apartment on Park Avenue in New York? What are you doing back in St. Francisville?
Well, let me answer your question with a quote. I can remember it. It was in a letter that Mr. Edward McGee wrote to his sister in 1809. And he said, "They say that when he comes into the parishes of the Felicianans, a man, without forgetting to please others, may please himself most variously. I expect to please myself most variously, doing the things that I know are there to be done in West Feliciana. Some of them are rather simple and basic, like getting back to nature. I happen to believe that most good things in life come from nature. I don't like city living. I like being as close to nature as I can get. Beyond that, as you know, at least I think, most Southerners have a deep sense of place. They always are able to and will quickly tell you where they came from, even though they may have been gone for decades. This is not true with people from other parts of the country. They usually tell you they're from wherever they are living at the moment.
Correct.
And this sense of place has, I suppose, part of my reason for coming back. I must quickly add that the people have a lot to do with it. Our country, our state of Louisiana is rich in a great many resources, as we know. But the resource that we perhaps have, that in which we are the richest, are the people of Louisiana. And so I want to come back to my people that I like, and a place that I think is beautiful in terms of the scenery, and there are a few challenges there that will keep me sufficiently busy.
How will you spend your time? How do you spend your time?
Well, I used to be a great reader, and I haven't had much chance to do other than official reading, and plenty of that in the last several years. We'll do some of that. I like to work outdoors. I'm a gardener of sorts, and I like to work with my hands. And the place that we have in West Feliciana needs a lot of attention, and so I can spend a lot of time doing that.
General, when one thinks, when a layman like me hears about the Marine Corps, thinks about the Marine Corps, the first words that pop into our mind is esprit de corps. Is that still strong in the Marines? Is that diminished any in the passage of time?
Not at all. It's maintained, sustained. It's not only a part of those who serve presently. It's still in those who may have served years and years ago. Once a Marine, always a Marine. It's interesting how that is achieved. Begin with, and this is so fundamental, we seek to bring into the Marine Corps the very best that we can recruit. And you don't just do that by some simple process. You must know what it is you're looking for. You must have the understanding of how that is done, and you must assign the best people that you can possibly find to go on that duty. We haven't always done that, and when we fail to do that, we have, for those brief periods, tainted the Marine Corps a little bit by harboring a few people who are out of step. That is not the case presently. So we bring in the best people we can. And then the recruit training experience at either San Diego, California, or Parris Island determines our distinctiveness as Marines more than anything else. For it is there that we give these young men and women more to do than they think they were ever capable of doing. And under the extraordinary leadership of the drill instructors, they succeed. And their self-esteem, their self-image goes up and never leaves them. And they make a kind of commitment to the institution, sort of an act of gratitude for making them better than they thought they could be made. And out of that comes the spirit of being a Marine, the discipline that we are so proud of, and it never leaves them. Even today, we find, as I travel around the country, an inordinate number of former Marines who will quickly come up and say that they reckon they are successes in whatever it is they're doing because they at one time served in the Corps. We are disproportionately represented in the corporate boardrooms of America. I could name names and corporations that would astound you. And I'm not talking about former Marine officers. I mean Marine corporals, yes, lieutenants, sergeants, whatever. So it's another way of saying that the Marine Corps does more than just make Marines. It also, if you come in as a good citizen, which is what we seek to recruit in the first place, we reinforce the values that you bring with you. And if you are missing a few, we give you those that you're missing. So it's development of good citizenship. It's one of the most rewarding experiences one could ever have, either to be a part of it or to bear witness, and I've been both. I was a recruit, and I commanded a recruit depot at Parris Island for 3 years. And it's a great place to visit and see this transformation taking place. It's one of the great undertakings in this great country of ours.
When you first joined the Marines, if you'll go back with me, a young fellow from St. Francisville, and ran into your first drill sergeants and so on, did you ever question, did you ever say to yourself, what am I doing here, and how can I get home? Or did you take to it from the start?
I took to it from the start. I had an interest in being a professional career military man before I enlisted in the Marine Corps. And I did take to it from the start. And I think in some respects that period of service for all of us was easier on the drill instructors and on the individuals involved, because most of us came from disciplined backgrounds. We were already 90% perhaps there, whereas today, while there's hunger for discipline, and you know, too much attention has been paid to the verb meaning of the word to punish, and not enough to the noun meaning, which is behavior in accordance with the mores and laws and customs, etc. There's a hunger for it, and so, but it's missing in large part, and so that's one of the things that we do, and that's one of the things that these young men and women get out of serving in the Marine Corps.
Sir, because these drill instructors virtually appear to the layman to have life and death, it appears that way over these recruits, that must be something that your staff must have to monitor very closely. Huh?
Oh, indeed. The drill instructors operate under the most finite regulations of do's and don'ts that you can possibly conceive of. And why? Because we draw a line between what is legal and illegal. We don't give them a big buffer zone so that they are far away from bumping up to that line. We let them go right up to it. If they transgress, they're in trouble, and they know it. But because they're up to the line of what's between legal and illegal, you can imagine that it's pretty doggone tough. We make it as stressful and still legal as we can possibly make it, because we are making Marines, people who might have to go to war, but we don't like to talk about that, do we? And we want them to be physically fit, mentally fit, morally fit. We want them across the board to be better people, ready to step in the ranks of others like them and win when required. You know, there's an old saying that success in battle is not a function of how many show up, but who they are. And there's a great deal to be said that when you pick up the morning newspaper or turn on the evening news and the headlines say the Marines have gone somewhere, some distant place, the name of which we probably have some trouble pronouncing, to do some seemingly impossible task. We, you, all of us, can breathe a sigh of relief, because I can assure you that their dedication to duty and desire to serve their country is a transcendent feeling in each and every one of them. And that all is carefully developed under these drill instructors that you asked the question about. The relationship of drill instructor to recruit could be given a simple definition: tough love. He cares about them, but he doesn't reveal it. But he cares about them enough to be tough on them to the extent that is required for them to be a Marine. If we had more of that kind of relationship in families, tough love, we would probably have a lot less problems in our society.
General Barrow, you'd make a pretty good recruiting officer yourself. You feel so. I must tell you that the most interesting thing for me in this interview is not only having the honor of meeting you, but I can tell that you feel so passionately about this business, this U.S. Marine Corps.
Oh, indeed, and never more so than presently. I think that our young Americans have been given short shrift. To begin with, they've had a lot of competing, conflicting things around them, disruptive influences. I don't like to be critical of your profession, television, but television takes that time. We've become a very mobile society. Every family seems to own 2 or 3 cars, and the keys to the car are readily available, and no one chooses to walk, they ride, and there's just so much going on to take the individual outside of thinking about himself in terms of relationship to others, and that's really what service to the country is so much about, that when given the chance, irrespective of the kind of background, when given the chance, they perform magnificently. And I'm just, I'm so proud of them I can't adequately express it.
Well, sir, we thank you for letting Louisiana Legends into the Commandant's home in Washington, D.C., and Mrs. Barrow has been lovely to us, and you make a man feel pretty secure. In other words, let me say this: if the rest of them are like you, I feel pretty secure about what's going on in the military of this nation. And on behalf of your fellow citizens, welcome home.
You're very kind, and it's good to be back.
Good, sir.
Major funding for this production is provided by American Bank of Lafayette, the financial choice of the 80s. Additional funding provided by the Friends of LPB and Union National Life Insurance, a Louisiana company serving Louisiana and the South since 1926.